Okay, next up we have Kim Liao. I met Kim at last year's Brooklyn Book Festival bookend event, and since then she's participated in our X Stories reading and our last Works in Progress workshop, and I'm thrilled to have her read tonight. Her bio is Kim Liao was a 2010-2011 Taiwan Creative Arts Fulbright Scholar, and she's been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Her creative nonfiction has been published or is forthcoming in Another Chicago Magazine, Hippocamus Magazine, Fourth River, and Fringe Magazine, and her book reviews have appeared in Plowshares and Read Divider. She lives in Brooklyn with her pet umbrella tree plant. Please give it up for Kim.
Hey guys, this is called The Attic, and it's an excerpt from My Formosa, a family memoir and adventure story. My Aunt Margaret warned me, don't go to Silay. There is nothing of our family left. The house is gone. There was a corrupt cousin. The youngest son of fifth uncle, Abao's younger brother, didn't consult with anyone, he just sold it, knocked down the house, demolished the ancestral home. So don't you go to Silay. There's nothing left of us there. Are there any other Liao family relatives still there, I asked her. Only the corrupt cousin. He is still there. If you go back to Silay, you must not go see him. But I don't think you'll enjoy going back. Everyone is gone. That was a week ago. Now I counted down the kilometers left to Silay. 15, 10, 5, and my breaths got shorter. The sun rose higher in the sky. I had been driving through lush groves of guava trees and acres of rice paddies. Little lime green shoots poked up from the waterlogged fields, but now the farmlands were turning into industrial towns, baked dusty and brown in the sun. It was mid-morning. I had been riding since dawn when I set out from Chiayi, the nearest major city, on this pilgrimage to see my family's hometown. Recalling Margaret's words, I turned down smaller and smaller roads, expecting to end up in a ghost town, empty except for the specters of my relatives, and Silay did have a hushed, deserted quality to it. Shops and buildings lined the quiet, dusty main street, mostly two-story traditional Taiwanese buildings, flat-roofed boxes with overhanging second-floor balconies, with businesses on the ground floor under shady, covered entryways, and residences upstairs. Compared with the modernized feeling of Taipei, I felt like I was traveling back in time by many decades. For a time, Silay was famous for being the hometown of my grandfather, Thomas Liao, infamous political fugitive who was hunted by Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT, and who became a leader of the Taiwanese independence movement and provisional republic in Japan. These days, it is known for the Shiluo Bridge, a red steel edifice that is the longest bridge in Taiwan, and for its artisanal soy sauce. Silay is also merely an exit on the highway, a village with street signs, residents, and coordinates of latitude and longitude. I slowed my speed as I turned onto Yanping Road, the main street of Silay, and looked around carefully, wondering which storefront housed the fossils and ashes of the Liao family tree. That was when I realized I had never gotten the address of the Liao ancestral home, neither from Margaret, who tried to talk me out of going, nor from any other family member who might have known. But reality was sinking in. I had taken the train to Chiayi, rented a scooter, drove for 2.5 hours to the mythical town of my family's past, and I had no idea where to go. I was lost in my ancestral hometown, in my own point of origin. The only slip of paper providing a clue was something my Taiwanese landlady, Susan, had scribbled down for me in Taipei before I left, the name of the Presbyterian church in Silay. The branch of the church was called Zhanglao Zhaohui. At the time, I thought it was the precious name belonging to the Silay church. It turns out that this Khoi phrase simply means Presbyterian church in Mandarin. The Liao family was influential in the Christian community, and they had given both land and money to establish the church in Silay. So the pastor there must know something about the family, and the church might even have an archive with information, I thought. Of course, I had not pressed Susan for help getting the address of this church in Silay. I just had 4 Chinese characters written on a Post-it note. What do? I asked myself silently as I coasted down the empty streets. Eat breakfast, my body urged. Get off the bike, breathe, you'll figure something out. I pulled up to a temple with many yellow lanterns adorning its outer gate. The temple had a large, empty courtyard with a distant altar decorated with statues of gods, bao blocks, fortune sticks, flowers, fruits, and other foods left out as offerings to the gods. My footsteps echoed quietly. I walked over to the table on the side of the courtyard where women were selling incense. Qingwen, I started. Nimen zhidao zhiga zhaohui zai nali? Excuse me, do you know where this church is? I showed them the post-it note. Ah, one of the women said. 我知道, I know. Hey you, she said in Mandarin, gesturing to a small, extremely dirty workman who was probably very busy fixing some part of the temple. Could you bring this young girl to the Zhonglao Zhaohui? Sure, I'll take you there, he said, hopping on a bicycle that appeared seemingly out from nowhere. Follow me. He pedaled off with speed, and I followed, jumping back on my scooter and taking off after him. I was trying to soak up as much of Sailé as I could with my eyes, nose, and ears, while still keeping him in sight and also generally abiding by traffic laws. He made a few sharp turns, leaving the main street and taking me down even quieter, more residential lanes that seemed to be the porous border between the town and the surrounding farmlands. He came to an abrupt stop outside the Presbyterian Church of Sailé, a beautiful gray stone two-story church standing stoically on a deserted street. This is the Zhonglao Zhaohui, the workman announced, and sped off on his bicycle as I called, wow, thank you, after him. The church was locked and empty. Even the pastor's office behind the church was closed. It was a Tuesday morning, and again, I cursed myself for being too scared to call in advance to make an appointment. Because although I had been taking Mandarin Chinese language classes in Taipei for nearly 3 months, I was still afraid of the telephone and of speaking and listening to disembodied Mandarin on it. I looked for any signs of human life in the vicinity of the church. Next door was a school. I could see children and nuns through the windows. I knocked on the screen door and the nun came out. Qingwen, is this school a part of that church? I am looking for the head person of the church, I said, not knowing the word for pastor. No, we're run by the Catholic Church across the street, she said in English, pointing. The pastor of the Presbyterian Church isn't here. Why don't you come back on Sunday? I'm only here today, I said desperately, and rummaged through my backpack, showing her a Xerox article in Mandarin, which I couldn't read, about Liao Wenyi, my grandfather Thomas, and his family's role in the independence movement. I'm looking for the site of my family's home, and I think the pastor could help me because my family helped start that church. Do you know where the Liao ancestral home was located? The nun frowned but seemed interested. I'm not from Sailé, but I know someone who could probably help you. Follow me, I'll take you to him. The nun went out to her car. Now, I'm unfamiliar with people in the religious community, but it had never occurred to me that nuns drove cars. I don't know what I thought they drove, broomsticks? Anyway, this one drove a Toyota sedan. She reached into her back seat and pulled out an enormous feather duster. It was almost half her height, proceeded to dust off her windshield. Then she climbed into the driver's seat and gestured for me to follow her. We took a completely different path of twisting local farmland roads to another school. She introduced me to the principal, showed him my documents, and spoke a lot of unintelligible Mandarin. He knows the pastor, she said to me in English. Du Musha is his name. He is away on church business, she told me, but here is his information. Call him before you come back next time. Unfortunately, the principal didn't know the location of the ancestral home either, and I was feeling both guilty and frustrated for spending so much of these kind people's time with so little result. I wondered if maybe I should just give up and drive home. As we returned to the parking lot, a woman walking along the road recognized the nun and ran over. Hi, hello. They hugged excitedly. Why are you here? Asked the nun's friend. The nun pointed to me and explained my story yet again. The friend's eyes lit up. Liao Wenyi, I know Liao Wenyi. I gasped with delight. Really? Yes, I am Saileran. I am from here. We knew the Liao family. I excitedly turned to her. Do you know where the ancestral home was? It's no longer there, but it used to be in Sailé. So beautiful, she said. I don't remember exactly where it was, but my husband knows. I'll call him, and he can come and show you. 5 minutes later, a burly Sailé man riding a big, low scooter came roaring up. Who wants to see the Liao family home? He asked gruffly. She does, said the wife, introducing me. She is Liao Wenyi's granddaughter. Huh, he growled, no kidding. Well, follow me. I set off again, following this man who had lived his whole life in Sailé. I wondered if he had known my family, my aunts and uncles, cousins, or their friends, and about his memories of this town from its more prosperous years. Finally, we returned to an intersection with Yanping Street, the road I had originally driven into Silay on. The man stopped his scooter and gestured at a building complex on our left. There, he grunted. Your family's ancestral home was there. The Liao family home was the most beautiful house in the whole town. I thanked him for showing me the site. He nodded and drove off. I parked my scooter and walked up to the buildings. I'd found it. Ground zero for the Liao family. The site of my family's ancestral home now held a dentist office and some condominiums and apartments, and on the corner, a fried chicken stand. I had succeeded in finding this geographic location. My lost family home, the place where Thomas was from, where the story of my parents began, and it was gone. Rebuilt, raised, knocked down, and replaced. It was all I could do to stay standing. My knees wanted to buckle and propel me to the earth where I would kneel or lie down in defeat or even start digging, clawing at the earth to find something, anything, that would prove that the Liaos had lived here. A stone, a rock, a spare bobby pin. Instead, I willed my legs to move and walked slowly around the premises, down side streets and around the block. Margaret's warning came back to me, her voice ragged in my ears. Don't you go to Silay, because everything from our family is gone. I was beginning to understand, finally, that I was alone on this search. I decided to stop for lunch before embarking on the long trip home. I went to a small restaurant, run by a friendly middle-aged woman. Why did I make this trip, I wondered, as I ate her tepid Italian-style noodles. Silay had been this myth, so many untold stories, unanswered and even unasked questions, a lost Ithaca to be reclaimed, like Odysseus venturing for so long to reach the homeland. Silay had always been a question in my heart, a void, but now I felt even emptier than before. I was approaching the counter to pay for lunch when the proprietor noticed my necklace, which I had been wearing all day. It was a circular golden pendant framing the Liao character in Chinese. I had put it on for luck, although I had laughed at my own superstition that morning, and as some kind of identification proof to myself. I'm a Liao, I belong here. But someone had finally taken notice. Ni Xing Liao, Wo Xing Liao, she exclaimed. Is your last name Liao? My last name is Liao. Really? I said, feeling a sudden sense of welcome. My family lived here. What a yeye shi Liao Wani? No, really? No, yes. Well, before you leave town, you must go to the Silay Luoyang Wenjiao Jijinhui. The what? She lost me. The woman reached out and grabbed my hand. Come on, I'll show you, follow me. We ran across the street and she dragged me into a building with a stone storefront. Inside, I realized that this was the Silay Historical Society, and the organization had refurbished the interior of a historic Taiwanese house. Upstairs was an exhibition space with old photos of Silay from the past 100 years. Excuse me, I asked the secretary, who should I contact if I want to come back and conduct research? She gave me the director's card. Are you interested in Silay's past? Yes, my family is from here. My grandfather was Liao Wani. She froze, her eyes widened. She grabbed my arm. Liao Wani, no! Yes! Come with me, you have to see this. I followed her back upstairs. The secretary walked right through the exhibition space and brought me to a narrow, dilapidated wooden staircase that was basically just a ladder set into the wall. Shaoxin, she instructed, be careful, and led me up into the attic. We walked carefully over the rafters, past dust-colored former exhibitions, photos, and junk. She pointed into the far corner. Look, Liao Wani and your family. I looked. There he was, Thomas Liao, my grandfather, and with him, my family. 4 huge exhibition displays were printed on giant yellow posters and mounted on wooden frames. The displays held pictures of my grandfather Thomas Liao and his siblings, as well as his nephew, my uncle Suho, and his wife, my Aunt Margaret. There were biographical descriptions of each family member and the roles they played in the Taiwanese independence movement. As the former leader of the movement, my grandfather Thomas's description was the longest. Look, the Liao house, the secretary said, and held up 2 large framed photos. There, in the attic, I finally got to see my family's ancestral home in its former glory. Several stories tall, the main building in the complex had lavish balconies and ramparts that were cut out in a crenulated pattern so that it looked like the top of a castle. Brightly colored flags flew from the balconies, and the rest of the wings of the complex branched off from the central tower, creating a giant square around a large courtyard, which I would later learn held a small pond and the region's only tennis court. I was spellbound as I traced the stone columns, the tiled walls, and teal detailing with my finger. Its opulence spilled through the confines of the glossy printed page. It must have dwarfed the rest of the buildings in the town. This was the proof that I needed to keep the search going, to bring me back to Silay for another trip. 6 months later, I would return with research contacts who would introduce me to the director of the Historical Society, to the Zhanglao Jiaohui pastor, Du Musha, and with the help of the director, we would find the corrupt cousin. But today, completely unprepared yet spurred on by the kind acts of strangers, I had finally come home. Surrounded by these exhibition boards in the dusty cobwebs, I knew I could go back to Taipei and continue the historical search for the story of my grandfather's failed independence movement, secure in the knowledge that the Liao family and their ancestral home were safe here in this attic. Thank you.